Anyone have any additions or edits? All right, seeing none, the agenda is approved. The next item is the approval of the June 27th audit committee minutes. Are there any additions to the minutes? All right, seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Today we have four reports. And so we'll go ahead and start with the first one, Director's Report with Matt LaTour.
Need to grab the clicker. Sorry.
Oh.
It's not presenting this one. Apologies. All right, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So thanks for joining us on a rainy Tuesday. And I just kind of preface this, I've mentioned in email. It's a relatively short agenda, so got a couple of reports to talk about today. I'm going to go through a little more detailed director's report, including some updates on some of our team activities, KPIs, follow-up, etc. And then, as I mentioned, at the end of my director's report, I'm going to open up just for committee questions. If there's anything that you'd like to address or for me to address at this time as we start to look towards the end of the year, I want to do some time for that and we'll get into the report. So, and I also just want to give some appreciation to my staff who put together my director's report because I was on vacation last week, so give them some ideas of how to structure it. They put together some materials for me and looked it over early this week, and so I think it turned out well, and just to give some kudos to my team. So I will start just with some project updates. So where we are in the year, we have some new projects we've just started to work on. We've got fuel management, and we're looking at non-revenue vehicles. IDASH, which is a Metro Transit HR system that tracks FMLA and occurrences of absence and a number of other things. Metro Transit customer comment and complaint system. And under the bucket of contract administration, we're still continuing to look at Southwest change orders and have some other contracts we've started to look at and may continue to add some to our sample throughout the year. As far as ongoing work goes, we have, another new project too. We have North Star reportable accidents, which is an annual project that we do every year. And we're also doing a risk assessment on the Met Council underutilized business program. Still weighing that there's some other work in that space, so we're before we decide and commit to our project plan, we're going to wait and see how and what the other work is going to include. Some ongoing work, we pretty much finished with our Metro Transit stockroom work. Looked at 6 stockrooms in the past few weeks. Continue to look at our Metro Transit cash room as they look at it moving to a new facility. We are working with the PD on our scoping for body-worn cameras. We have an IT lifecycle management audit that's near completion, just awaiting management response. And so I wanted to point out this year that we are probably as close to completion of the written audit plan as we've almost been in the last 4 or 5 years. I think there's a few HRA payments, hiring, and some other work that we're going to consider as we get into our risk assessment process. Again, there's some ideas that others in the organization are going to be looking at hiring and some other things, so we're going to consider that along with what our value add is going to be in terms of hiring and some other projects. So I'll talk a little bit in the December meeting about where we finished vis-a-vis our audit plan, but I think just a preview, we should be getting through 75 to 80% of the plan is written. And it was a pretty ambitious plan actually, so. Just some other projects I want to talk about a little bit. I think most of you on the committee know that we used to do some sub-recipient and contract audit work for our transportation providers. We stopped doing that a few years ago, but there's a few holes that needed filling. One of them is just inventorying some of the technology on the buses that we volunteered to help out with. So we loaned some staff to that effort. Auditors reviewed 735 vehicles across 7 locations. It's about 300 hours. And you can see just this is the ripple of of staff days. And the gray is everything else. So you can see in July, this was actually one of our highest, biggest projects. So it's pretty temporary, short work, but took up some time, and we had a lot of intern help, a lot of getting in and crawling in and out of buses this summer. Also, coordination of external audits. The OLA continues to work on a Green Line Extension financial audit. They are working also on a Metro Mobility audit. This year, we've started to track much closer some of the work the MPCA is doing in terms of oversight of our environmental services. So a few of us have been mostly just going along on some of the on-site inspections to learn and observe about what their work entails. It's been really interesting, I think enlightening, and a good chance for us to connect with some of the staff out in the environmental services facilities. So permits and tanks, fuel tanks and other permits in terms of environmental services activities. Some federal audit work that has been ongoing, FTA drug and alcohol compliance, that we have a draft report awaiting action. I'll make sure we get a final copy of that when it's issued to this committee. The FTA looked at our indirect cost rates earlier this year. We had a HUD emergency housing voucher program audit, among others. As I mentioned, we were starting our risk assessment process, really actually starting the audit planning process. The risk assessment process has been underway since really July. Completed 56 meetings, and we are, as we usually do, and collected a lot of really good information, probably have the broadest and deepest list of potential audit work that we've ever had. I think we've really, involving our staff in the last few years and having them kind of develop the relationships with the business units has been really advantageous. I think they're getting to know the business units. That's generating better discussions and better ideas. And so we really expect to have a good and robust list of projects to work with to narrow down to our final audit plan. So, and I know in past years we've talked about what's kind of up above the line, below the line, the audit plan. So I think we can do a little more detailed discussion with this committee in December about here's all the things we heard about, and here's what we're selecting and why. So again, just the staff, the graph is just the staff days, just to show you really ramped up in August, and then it goes down in September. We'll be building up a little bit here too as we select the audits for the plan. All right, so non-project updates. I've mentioned this committee before. One of the ways I would like our team to better engage, and we're actually holding staff accountable to this, is our visibility metric for our staff. It's part of the competencies for all staff in terms of how they're evaluated. So I asked this year for 8 hours from everybody, and I'll show you in a minute, how we're doing against that as an internal KPI. Some examples that we've done. Great Day in Transit is a transit-wide activity. Really, it means having transit staff get out, get on a platform, ride a train, get on a bus, interact with the public. I know just myself and Nick went to the Green Line station at Central Station and handed out a survey for riders, interacted with people. So we've had a number of staff participate in that. We've had staff reaching out to informational interviews across the council just to get to know somebody. The ask here is not somebody you work with all the time. So somebody who you don't know, who maybe you met at a conference or met in a meeting and wanted to get to know them a little better. We've done some site visits and tours. We went to the Blue Line light rail facility, did a tour of the entire facility with Mark Benedict, and if you see on the far right, there's a couple pictures. We actually rode the train in the cabin all the way down to Mall of America and back, and got it, which was a really interesting way to see how the system works and how our drivers, what they see every day. So that was a really interesting, informative experience. A few of our staff went out on the Gold Line construction tour. We've had a few staff go to Metropolitan on a couple of occasions. We've got staff attending employer resource group events. So all in all, I think this has been a very positive experience for staff. We've gotten good feedback both from our staff and from several of the general managers, Lisa Thompson, Leslie, when they hear that we're out, are saying good things and saying that we've had positive interactions. So I think it's been a really good, force metric if you will. So here's the chart, and we named delimited, but just to show roughly how we're doing. So the middle of that graph is the 8 hours. So we're tracking this within our time as a separate metric, and you can see, most staff either far exceeded or are getting pretty close. I think one of those is me, and I've probably done a lot that I haven't recorded, but you can see everybody's making. In fact, I'm probably the lowest. I'm guessing I'm probably the lowest. So very positive there in terms of getting our staff to interact with the rest of the council. Another thing we're looking at in terms of training, making sure that we're all hitting at least 20 hours of training a year. A couple of things that we've done. Nick is actually at the Ignite conference that IAA puts on in Las Vegas this week, so that's why he's not here today. Julie and I attended the Ethics and Compliance Institute. Andra is virtual attendee as well. A few weeks ago, and on ethics and compliance, very enlightening, interesting, a lot of feedback we can take back to council for consideration. We've done a lot of our newer audit staff have done a lot of the IAA training, skills for the new auditor, IT general controls, and data accountability, and there's a rethinking internal audit training coming up that a few of us are attending. Others, project management and mid-dot safety training. So I think overall it just shows we're getting our training in and probably exceeding that, which I think is a positive there. I have a couple other things I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to have Brenda come up and talk about follow-up. So just department staffing. So one of our auditors, Kevin Ely, left the council for head of accounting a few weeks ago. We're happy to see him go to stay in the public sector. That's a very positive thing, good for Kevin. I think it sounds like he's doing well, he's happy there. Devin Leeson, who's one of our interns, ended his internship early. We had a great summer with him. I think the experience was very positive. He's in business school, and it was just becoming a little bit overwhelming. So, which is okay. I think when we have situations where people are being straight, it's just not worth trying to continue things. So, all good on that front. We're currently recruiting for both a senior auditor and an auditor position, hoping to start interviews in the next couple of weeks. And I did want to mention, just from the team aspect, Brenda Bargefield, who's about to come up here, received an Unsung Hero Award from the council at our recognition event a few weeks ago. So very proud of Brenda for all her work. Just some other things, we did a staff retreat this fall that was a good bonding experience, I think, for everybody, and enjoyed some of the good weather. So one last thing I want to talk about before we get into the follow-up, and then we'll go into questions. So actually, you know what, I'll talk about it now. I mentioned before the workshop that we wanted to schedule with the audit committee. Just a few things. So it's been challenging to get it scheduled, so that's the only reason we've been delayed. Just for your awareness and the draft agenda, part of the reason I wanted to bring this up now is that it gives you an opportunity to ask us if you do have some questions. The agenda that I have for this would be some time for each of the committee members to talk about their backgrounds, kind of get to know each other a little bit, goals for the council and goals for the audit committee. So start thinking about how you as committee members would like to see this committee, what achievements you'd like, what our goals could be, objectives. I particularly like to hear from some of the other chief audit executives about your experiences with how you run your departments, how your audit committee is structured. I think it would be beneficial for the other committee members, especially the council members, to hear, and would be beneficial for me as well. I know we've talked about that a little bit, but that would be useful. I particularly like to hear from some of the other chief audit executives. I'm going to go around to the council and ask a few people, probably Phil Wall-Jasper, some others, to talk about goals, objectives. We're working through some new mission, vision, and goals for mission, vision, values for regional administration that we're just rolling out to staff right now. So talking about that and just how we're approaching the council, Committee Member Jorgensen is aware that we're starting to look at internal controls want to say unit or just kind of a focus on internal controls of the council in the coming months. So that's a topic that I'd like to address. I've sent out draft charters, probably forgot, but it was a while back. I want to rekindle those. I wanted to have that discussion in the workshop setting so we can just kind of go through what the intent is, see if there's any amendments we want to do. We'll take that back for a formal action later at whatever the next meeting is, but that would be a good time to work through. And just any other topics that would be of interest, I think, to sort of preempt a question that I know is coming. Also the role of the chief audit executive in the organization. So some details around that. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Brenna, and she's going to walk through a little bit of follow-up metrics, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Great.
Do you need the, or do you want me just to guide you?
It's just a couple slides.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Chair Lee, members of the committee. Quick updates on some of our follow-up leading into this audit committee. Shown here is a ribbon chart. If you've been at a number of audit committees, you can tell that I like these. But here is just demonstrating that really most of the recommendations we've issued for reports that we presented in 2020, 2021, majority of those are in a place where we've followed up, they've been implemented either whole or partially. We still have some in the last couple of years that are not due and continued work to follow up on those. And on the next slide, I have this more broken down in terms of which ones are still open, which ones are closed. Again, most of the ones that are not implemented are still open. We're still working on following up on those. I know there's a couple here that might be catching eyes, those closed not implemented or some of those partially implemented ones. I'm happy to answer questions about those if there's interest in it. But again, I think we've done a much better job actually reaching back out with the business units this year as compared to at different points in the past. And as we've heard based on previous feedback from committee members, looking at, okay, it's been a couple years, what's been going on? Is there anything getting in your way? Or how can we make sure that we are following through with that value add?
Going back to that, Chair Lee,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
LaTour. So just, you don't have to get into specifics here, but as far as those closed partially implemented and closed not implemented, I'm just curious kind of at an overall level, were some of those partially or not implemented because things have changed and they're no longer relevant, or were they partially implemented or not implemented because management chose to accept the risk?
For sure, some of the closed not implemented ones in 2019 and earlier, I know we had a cluster of those that aren't in this particular table. Those were because the situation changed. They were related to a contract, we chose to end that contract, and therefore it no longer applies. These ones that are closed, not implemented, I have the specific audit they relate to. I wasn't involved in that audit, so I don't know too many particulars, but I could ask an auditor who was involved to explain a bit further. And then for the ones that were partially implemented, I was involved in 2 of the 3 of those, and some of those partially implemented ones are situations where management made the action that they were going to make and it maybe fulfilled the letter of the recommendation but not the spirit, or we were hoping to see maybe a little more work towards the recommendation, but there was still something, and that there is progress and that's what it's going to be.
So just one additional comment, I just want to commend you because generally when you see low numbers like this for closed, partially implemented, closed, not implemented, but most things are implemented, that means you're giving good recommendations and solid recommendations that are useful to management. So I just want to point that out and commend you for that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Lee. So on the closed unimplemented partially implemented, while we're on this topic, maybe just a suggestion or something I'd be thinking about is anything you can do to be able to show that the risk has been addressed. So for like the non-implemented ones, what I'm hearing is you believe that the risk has been addressed because they changed the contract or got out of that contract or stopped using a system or whatever it might be where you recommended something. So I guess I would see that a little bit differently than them just choosing to accept the risk. And in places where they accept the risk, and this might be something we could talk about at the retreat that you were discussing as well, I would think that if they're choosing to accept the risk, I'd want to get some sort of update to the committee on what that risk is that they're accepting, to make sure that the committee feels comfortable with management's position.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Go ahead, Mike.
Next slide, please. And finally, here are just a couple examples of recommendations that we were able to follow up on and close out in the lead up to this committee meeting. I know I was just up here about a quarter ago talking about MnDOT with the group here. Happy to see that a lot of those recommendations are in a position where we can close them. There's some others where it's just because of timing. We can't quite confirm everything yet. And then, although I wasn't involved in contract administration, I know there is some follow-up work there as well, and also seeing forward progress there. And with that, I will return the floor back to Matt.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So I think the discussion about, and we may need to even consider changing the categories here and say risk accepted or risk avoided or risk mitigated. That might be a helpful way to say this, because I think, and we also, I would like at the workshop retreat to have a discussion about risk acceptance. I know that that's, with our enterprise risk management focus, still rolling out, but it's, Phil Wall-Jasper's had like 5 jobs this year, so it's been, that's slowed things a little bit in terms of getting kind of organized around that concept. But I think it's important to make sure that we have a systematic way to bring those back to the committee and have that discussion. I think it's important, and there's some of the, I would say, the unimplemented recommendations, particularly in the IT space, that will probably, I think even when we presented these, we've known that it's probably going to be a while, right? And so we have to kind of keep having that conversation of like, are we continuing to keep these open? Do we close them as not implemented and just accept the risk for the short term, or for the medium term, or even long term? I think that's an important discussion to have and figure out exactly how we're going to do it. So we haven't really had to encounter that quite yet, but.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think one thing that would be really good to talk about at the retreat, kind of tying some of this thing together, is this enterprise risk that we're talking about. With the work that I do with transportation, the key one for me is the Transway Advancement Policy, which has project risk, that has enterprise risk, and at what level do the policymakers should be versus staff be weighing in on what is an acceptable and not acceptable risk, and which of those, because we don't want that for every project or every question, but there are times when I think that the policymakers need to have a voice in that discussion as to what the risk levels are, and I think that would be really helpful as to what hits that threshold and why.
It's good feedback, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from Matt? All right, thank you, Brent. With that, we'll go on to.
One more thing. This is the part where I wanted to open it for questions. I got 2. Do you, Councilmember Galswick, do you want to just ask your questions, or do you want me to?
Either way. So one, I think you already mentioned. Sorry, Chair Lee. Arthur LaTour. I think when you already addressed that, we'll probably discuss at the retreat just again the ongoing questions related to reporting lines and associated with your annual review and those types of things. I just think that'd be a good area for us to discuss. And then the other piece was I was wondering about an update on the contracting that you were working on related to independent construction audits that would be working with internal audit directly.
Sure. So yes, I think on the first question, I think it's a good topic. And I just, as you were saying that, it reminded me that I've talked to this committee about a lot of the executive turnover we've had this year. And just to update that a little bit, we have a chief HR officer on board, a director of risk management, and Metro Transit's filled a number of positions. IS has filled out 3 directors in the past 2 months. So there's been a lot of progress in terms of getting these positions hired. We're also in the process of hiring a regional administrator. I know that is going through interviews right now. And also the CFO position is open for applications, and we're reviewing applications. So the RA will, I think, directly impact, there'll be a new person in that role, which relates to the Chief Audit Executive's performance evaluation in this committee. So I think it's a really good time to have that discussion before that position is filled or as it's being filled. As far as the construction contract can go, we're reviewing proposals now, and I can tell you there's 2 proposals that we're reviewing. So we expect to be done with that evaluation in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and we should have a contract executed by the end of the year to start fresh next year. So we'll be a little bit behind in terms of fully being able to incorporate the new vendor into our risk assessment and audit plan. So I expect we might just have to execute the audit plan and then maybe amend that after the new vendor has had time. The first activity I have slated is for them to look at projects in terms of a risk assessment on their own. And I know between the proposals there'll be some information about how they would evaluate that. So I think we're getting closer. I think I appreciate the question. Good time to ask. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Shirley. Under LaTour, so for the construction auditing firms, do you have sufficient resources to do that as an ongoing, or is it going to be just for a couple-year period type situation?
Councilmember Lee, members of the committee, we have a 2-year proposed contract for about $500,000 with options to extend. So I think it's let's start and see how this goes with an idea that we would likely continue in the future, probably at a higher level. Thank you.
Any other questions for me?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Lee. Auditor LaTour. So going back to your comments on hiring, I heard you say that you're looking to hire 1 senior auditor and 1 auditor. With the loss of Kevin Ely, are you looking at an IT auditor, or are you looking at other ways of trying to get an IT auditor?
Chair Lee, members of the committee, it's a good question. So what we've decided to do is really focus on training all of our staff on IT general controls. So I think most, if not all, staff have taken the IT general controls training from the IAA. And we are really just trying to bake in IT general controls to any audit. The IDASH is one that comes to mind that we just talked through the risk assessment today. I think I would say this for a combination of reasons. I think we found that recruiting for IT auditors is both challenging and expensive. And I think that we've heard some anecdotes from IAA that that's just the way that a lot of audit departments are going, that it's really going to be a core competency to understand IT and general controls. So for now, that's where we're going to head. I think there could be some opportunities for looking at that again, also looking at co-sourcing as a potential option if we needed to, either robustly or even in part. So, but I think right now we feel comfortable that we can address at least what's on our existing audit plan with the staff plus training.
Any more questions for me? All right, thanks, Matt. And we'll move on to our second report, Metro Transit Grants Administration with Tim Larson and Aimee Gillespie.
Chair Lee, members of the committee, hi, my name is Aimee Gillespie and I'm here with Tim Larson and we're going to present our grants administration audit. Right, so a little bit of background on this project. The Metropolitan Council relies on a variety of grant funding to fund capital projects, daily operations, bus and facility repairs. One type of grant that we receive is formula or apportioned grant funding, which is allocated based on an FTA formula. Some metrics that the FTA formula includes or considers is vehicle revenue miles, vehicle revenue hours, passenger miles traveled, unlinked passenger trips, and operating expenses. Once those formula funds are allocated, the council draws down appropriate funds for each project after expenses are incurred. So this table shows an overview of all the grant funds that were within the scope of our audit. So first we have 5307, which is the Urbanized Area Formula Grants. That is by far our largest source of formula funding. After that, we have Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities, or 5310 funds. After that, our second largest source of formula grant funding is State of Good Repair Grants, or 5337. And finally, we have Grants for Buses and Bus Facilities Program, which is 5339A funds. We did want to note that even though all of these grants were in the scope of our audit, due to sampling, we did not test any projects that use 5310 or 5339A funds. So this audit had 4 objectives. The first was to determine if projects that receive formula funding are approved and set up according to grant management control documents prior to the project commencing. Determine that at a minimum, controls have been established to monitor project budgets, schedule, and performance. Determine that expenses are within the scope of grant funding requirements for the projects within the sample. And finally, determine if closeout activities are being performed according to FTA requirements and grants management control documents. So we did not have any formal findings for this audit, but we did just have a few observations or things we wanted to bring to your attention. So the first was that documentation of project setup does exist, but it was a little bit difficult to find. One example of that is the IGAs. They do exist, it just took a little bit to find them. Next is that there are a number of different methods used to monitor grant budgets. So one way we do this is grant staff publishes budget reports onto MetNet, which is helpful for project managers. They can easily download them. And every single project manager we talked to was using a different way to track their budgets, so an Excel spreadsheet. So tracking is happening, it's just not happening in a standardized way. Next is that all invoices that we sampled were within the scope of the grant program, which is a good thing. And finally, projects and NOGAs are closed out according to FTA requirements and internal procedures. So 2 things we're doing really well. So in conclusion, Metro Transit grant staff are handling apportioned grants according to FTA requirements and grants management control documents. Controls are in place for formula funded projects to ensure that setup and approval is happening correctly, that expenses are appropriate per the grant funds, and that closeout activities are completed on grant projects. We can take any questions.
But Committee Member Johnson.
Sure, thank you. So has an audit like this been conducted in the past? And if so, is this an improvement? Can you see measurable improvements from the last audit that was conducted?
Chairman, committee member. So when we were scoping out the developing the scope for this audit, we had looked at, there was kind of buckets of grant programs we wanted to look at. There was capital, there was CMAQ, and then there was kind of this apportioned chunk that nobody had really looked at before. So to my knowledge, there hasn't been any work done on apportioned grants. There has been work done on the grant side, but I don't remember the details of the previous audits.
Chair, members of the committee, the FTA does look at grants through the triennial process at a relatively high level through our FMO in 2019. Those are relatively high level overviews, as you can imagine. It's really just they'll look at a few documents to make sure they're there. So this is probably the most in-depth we've gone. I would say that we've looked at parks grants in recent years that had several findings. So relative to that, this is clean, but it's a different type of grant. So I'll just say too that I think grants is one of those topics that we have grants in a number of different silos in the organization. We're sort of going piece by piece through as a kind of a routine audit. So it's good news, I think, for this area. Relatively high risk given it's FTA. We get a lot of money from the FTA, but I think also what the observations sort of tell you is that a more structured and disciplined approach around internal control, just making sure that we're a little cleaner in terms of where we're keeping things, would be helpful to make sure that we're continuing to have finding audits.
And then just, sorry, as a follow-up, the grants management control documents, those are internal kind of policies and procedures, I'm assuming, and are they the same for all divisions within the council?
Charlie, a committee member, Jorgensen. So yeah, it's internal documents. I can't speak to if it's consistent across all grants, just for the ones we're looking at.
Committee member Barbara.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the things when we were talking new hires and all that is standing up this new regional transit infrastructure division. Seems like, you know, there will still be some of these funds that go through Metro Transit, just, you know, things like 5307 funds, which we typically use to buy buses and things like that. But others that might apply to the infrastructure division. And so I think as that division is stood up, obviously we can put in some best practices, but how do you see those two sort of coexisting and working together and making sure they're reporting the same way? Sorry, I gave you a nice easy question. I love it when I make them laugh. That's a good sign.
Honestly, it's probably a good question to raise to those that are, you know, starting the division. I would say that in my experience here over 8 years, I would say that the grant programs are set up very differently. I mean, just in terms of, you know, there are different questions. I mean, different types of funding require different things. These apportionment grants are relative. They're formula funds. They're pretty flexible, whereas, you know, project-specific grants are for Southwest Light Rail. They have those things they can be spent on. Parks, if you remember that presentation, I think we had a graph where the funds, they flow and trickle, and it's very complicated, and there's all kinds of requirements, and we mainly pass through the money. And, you know, I think the new division will primarily be handling funds through 5307 program, 5309 program. And so we'll have to think about, and the council really has to think about as a whole, you know, this is one of those key questions. Do you try to centralize the process? Do you have key controls that are consistent across divisions, you know, with some flexibility built in? And so part of trying to get through all of these different grant fundings is we can then maybe have a little bit, answer the questions you're asking a little better in terms of, well, how do each compare? And so we've been sort of getting through one piece at a time. But it's an important question I think we'll have to address as we go through.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask a clarifying question? So am I making the assumption that the budget process and the budget reports is uniform across the Metro Transit grants, but just the monitoring and reporting out and closing is different?
So Chair Lee, Committee Member Dover. So the monitoring portion of it, yeah, so there's the grant staff publish a standardized budget report that they put on that. When we met with the project managers, so some of them go purely directly on that report, and that's what they use. Some of them use that in combination with some of their own information. They modify their own Excel spreadsheet, and I think we had one instance where somebody wasn't really familiar with that report that was being published, but they had their own, they brought up their spreadsheet, and it was pretty detailed as far as like line items and schedule and when the expenses were being incurred. Then there's also the financial FFRs and the MPRs, milestone progress reports, as well as the federal financial reports, or whatever the acronym is. Those provide another level of detail about budgetary information and monitoring for the project.
Could I do a follow-up? So because the funding amount for each of the bucket here is so small, like I'm not that concerned. And I'm assuming FTA, like that doesn't impact any of the FTA grants. For some of the bigger amounts, if you have different reporting process, like do you fall out of like your compliance with FTA?
Generally, so when we did the scope for this, I mean, we were keeping it kind of high level as far as budget reporting. The requirement really is just having something in place.
Okay.
As far as we know, or when we researched it, they didn't really specify, the FDA doesn't really specify how you go about doing that, just you have to have a method in place to monitor your budget.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thanks, Tim and Amy. And it looks like you're also doing the next presentation on unemployment insurance.
Yeah, so committee members will be going over the unemployment insurance audit that we recently completed. But first we always like to give a little background information. So MNUI, or Minnesota Unemployment Insurance, is a department or a program within the Department of Employment and Economic Development, or DEED. And so MNUI is responsible for taking in all those applications for unemployment, reviewing them, making a determination on them, and then providing the benefits, unemployment benefits, to those that are qualifying. The council has what's called a reimbursing account. So instead of paying a flat tax every quarter, we just pay for the unemployment benefits that we're directly responsible for. Caveat is that we have to supply wage information or wage reports to MNUI on a quarterly basis. We have to do so at a certain time frame or a certain due date. And then just to note, during the pandemic, MNUI stopped issuing bills to the council. They were just inundated with the number of claims that were coming in, both fraudulent and otherwise, and then just issuing the benefits to those that needed. Billing did start again in quarter 1 of 2022. We did get notification that billing was going to start again, and then that bill in quarter 1 of 2022 did include the previous 7 months, or 7 quarters, of amount that we owed. And the table just shows, for the scope that we reviewed, how many qualified applicants and the benefits we paid. So for this audit, pretty simple for the objectives. The first was that we wanted to make sure that we were making timely responses to MNUI. So that included things like, as soon as we were notified that somebody had applied, we provide some background or basic information to MNUI. We can also then, if we think that something may not be right or it might be fraudulent, we can raise a flag or an issue for them to look into. And then anything to do with appeals, there are certain timelines we want to make sure that we're hitting. And then the second, we wanted to make sure that we were paying the quarterly bill on time, and then similarly providing those wage detail reports. Turn over to you.
All right, so for this audit, we did have 3 findings. The first is that the council paid the UI bill late for 4 out of the 5 periods that we reviewed. There were a handful of reasons for this. The first one is that the council was just relying a little too heavily on manual processes such as reminders to pay the bill. The other component is that communications between MNUI and the Met Council primarily come through snail mail. So letters from MNUI would come and arrive in our mailroom and just not make it to payroll where they belong. They would just get rerouted somewhere else, and so payroll didn't receive those. And then finally, after payments resumed after COVID-19, payroll just didn't have access to the website, MNUI's website, in order to pay the bill. So, the next finding is that HR is not retaining required unemployment claims or appeals documentation. However, the Office of General Counsel, OGC, was retaining this documentation, so it's not like it wasn't anywhere, it just wasn't retained in HR. And then finally, it is unclear when the council is responding to MNUI. So the other thing with MNUI's website is that it doesn't track when actions were taken on accounts or claims. So to address this, HR created its own tracking spreadsheet to kind of help track when actions were taken, and they shared that with us, which was helpful. And based on the decisions that HR was making on the claims, we could kind of assume that they were responding on time in a timely manner. However, we found that that specific date wasn't listed in the tracker, so we couldn't technically prove that we were responding on time. While we were looking into council response timeliness, we also discovered that the council does not ever appeal any MNUI decisions. So in conclusion, HR is raising issues and OGC regularly responds to appeals and attends hearings. However, better controls, adhering to their attention schedule, and reviewing the option to appeal MNUI determinations may help mitigate risks. Any questions?
Thanks, Amy. I have one question regarding the snail mail issue. How are we resolving that? Is our inter-office snail mail system so complex that people are just not sending mail to the right departments, or?
Yeah, Shirley. So there were a handful of instances where the bill would end up going, instead of to payroll to pay it, would go to HR for whatever reason. I think with the response that finance had, I might have Marie speak to it, that should eliminate the issue. But I don't know if you want
to. Mr. Chair and committee members, yes. there was some confusion in the past of where this invoice would go, whether it be HR to review or payroll. My recommendation, and the staff has agreed, that we will be taking this process out of payroll. Payroll has nothing actually to do with paying the invoice. They've been doing a journal entry, and then we wire the money over to the state. So this way, HR is responsible. It's very clear where those invoices need to go. Then they will be processing coded by division and paid through our AP process. So we have a better actually tracking throughout our system through the subledger instead of just wiring money through.
Thanks, Mary. Any other questions for the presenters? Go ahead, Committee Member Goswell.
Hi, thank you, Chair Lee. So just want to talk a little bit more about the appeals process and why that maybe wasn't happening in the past. And do we have any sense, I know it's difficult without digging into the work yourself, but is there any sense of whether some of these payments may have been fraudulent or some of these, if the council would have had a different determination on the results if those were reviewed?
Chair Lee, Committee Member Gillespie. So we heard maybe some lore about why we don't appeal decisions. We never really got a satisfying answer why we don't. So I can't answer that. But I don't think there are too many that, based on what we've seen, HR does a pretty good job of screening out a lot of the stuff that comes through that, raising flags and then UI denying that. Maybe there might be a handful, but my sense is, after going through this, there's probably not a lot that would be fraudulent.
Clarifying?
Yeah, question.
Thank you, Chair Lee. So to clarify, the council's been working with MNUI on the front end on these to flag ones that appear to be questionable, et cetera. It's just on the back end there hasn't been appeals. So it isn't like they aren't being reviewed by the council. It's just that kind of secondhand review or the after the fact reviews that. Correct. Got it.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Tim and Amy. Our last item is the goal line team contract review. We have Tunde and Cindy.
Members, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. So thank you for joining our presentation. We will be providing you with some details on a review of our goal line A&E contract number 17P058. The consultant Kinley Horn and Associates is providing A&E services for the goal line BRT project, which will connect St. Paul to Maplewood, Oakwood, and Woodbury. Executed in January 2018, this contract is in its fourth and final stage. KHA is currently providing design support to the construction contractor. Now, our audit sought to assess compliance with the terms of contract number 17P058, and to identify any potential gaps in contract management. I sound somewhat nasal because I've got something going on. I apologize. The audit objectives were to determine if the pay applications were prepared, paid, and documented according to contractual terms and all governing rules, and also if contractual deliverables were provided as stipulated by the contract. In scope of this engagement, audit reviewed contract number 17P058, the Met Council's policies and procedures, and the National Association of State Procurement Officials, or NASPO's, best practices. Audit also spent a considerable amount of time interviewing goal line project staff. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Ed. Now, audit reviewed 31% of total pay applications for contractual compliance, prompt payment, and reliability. Audit also assessed 14% of total deliverables to ensure they satisfy contractual requirements. At this juncture, I'd like to hand over to my colleague who will fill you in further, Ms. Kloster.
Thanks, Tunde.
So on the pay application testing side, we found that 7 of our pay applications that we reviewed for compliance with contractual terms were compliant. And we also found that all 20 reviewed for prompt payment were found to be prompt and allowable. On the deliverables testing side, all sampled deliverables were accounted for, although some did require project office assistance to locate. During this process, Audit also reviewed adherence to document storage, naming conventions, and timelines that were stipulated by the contract, and it was determined that overall document management could be improved. So this led us to 2 findings and 3 recommendations. Our first observation was that a complete and accurate contract file, deliverable file, was not maintained. So although all 28 deliverables sampled were located or otherwise accounted for, excluding microstation and geopack files, which would be received at the end of the project, 15 of those deliverables required project office assistance to locate because they were stored outside of the designated deliverables folder. The reason for this, we determined, was that the project office defines deliverable more narrowly than the contract does, and intermediate and ad hoc products, such as supporting documentation, were not necessarily considered and stored in the same way as other deliverables. Based on NASPO, the National Association of State Procurement officials, we recommend that a centralized and organized repository for all contract deliverables that are specified is maintained, including those ongoing or ad hoc items that are specified in the contract. The project office, the management concurs that this recommendation should be carried forward, that a centralized and organized repository is important, and management stated that they will continue to review deliverables as they're made to ensure that they comply with the contract and project requirements. Our second observation was that deliverable file names did not conform to the established naming conventions in the Goldline Project Office document naming control policy. Common violations that we found included the incorrect use of revision numbers or a lack of revision numbers, the inclusion of special characters such as % signs and $signs, which limit the search function, and the absence or an incorrect acronym, which indicates the type of file. The overall cause we determined for this is the unclear assignment of roles and responsibilities related to document naming review between the project office, the project management consultant, and the engineering service consultant. So what we recommend is to conduct regular file reviews to ensure the compliance with the document management plan and to correct any discrepancies that are noted. We also recommend an update to the document management plan. We had noted that file names don't correspond directly to contract task numbers, which can make it difficult to identify what deliverables are satisfying what contractual requirements. We recommend that file names correspond to these, and we also recommend that there's clearly defined roles and responsibilities, especially for monitoring and enforcement of these naming conventions. And then the Goldline Project Office concurred with these observations. In response to the first recommendation this quarter, they will be beginning to conduct periodic quality control checks. So they'll be working with their project managing consultant to do that, and beginning next year in Q3, they will be implementing future document control plans that will include and require descriptive file names, and will also require the project management ACUR and PMC or ESC on the file names. And I also just wanted to mention that the Goldline Project Office additionally has taken extra steps that they have requested their ESC and PMC consultants to adhere to these naming conventions, and that they're also planning a training on document management to be held in late December. So with that, Tunde and I would love to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions from the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to revert to the same comment I made earlier, that as we stand up this regional transit infrastructure division, that all of this, there should be consistency in how documents are managed, how things are coded, how things are tracked and centralized, because part of that is to have efficiencies between all these different projects. You know, like say gold, purple, green, whichever, we utilize similar expertise for certain functions, but in order for that to work, we all have to be using the same language and that type of things.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I take that point. I'll just, one anecdote and then I think a follow-up is, I spoke with Craig Lamothe, the project director of Purple Line. He reviewed this report as already incorporating recommendations into that project as well. So I think we're already starting to see that that is starting to happen. I think that in the future with an executive director of capital projects, that will be a good focal point to make sure that these controls are implemented across projects and not as that every project is starting over with a different plan every single time. So I expect that our capital project auditing construction outside auditor will focus recommendations toward the project, all projects rather than just, because as we know, it's like this contract is, as we mentioned, is in stage 4. It's already almost done. So it's less important to focus on this contract. It's almost more important to focus the recommendations on the next project. So appreciate the comment.
Any other questions?
Chair, you have a question, not specifically related to this audit, but it raised a question for me. So it also has to do with naming convention. So I think you're using the word finding and observation.
Yeah.
Yeah, to mean the same thing. So, but then what I see, especially in this case, is that there are multiple recommendations potentially associated with any findings / observation. So I'm thinking back to the chart that we were viewing. So is that a count of recommendations or a count of findings?
It's based on findings, correct, Brenda? Sorry.
Yes, the charts and graphs that I showed during the director's report, those are all at the recommendation level. I have a couple other that are at the issue, finding, observation level.
So we're looking at recommendations that were implemented or not implemented. And
Correct. Okay.
all right, thank you.
Any other questions? I'd just like to say, I second Councilmember Barber's point. It reminds me of, there's this, I don't know if it's true or not, but there's this urban legend that in the early days of space exploration, the Soviets and the Americans were making two different modular things that were supposed to connect in space, and the Americans were using inches. And the Soviets were using metric, and when they went into space, the things weren't connecting. And so it's important that we use the same language so that all the departments can be on the same page. I really appreciate the conversation and the meaningful and thoughtful questions that committee members were engaging with staff today. So thanks everyone for engaging with the reports. And thanks to the staff for always making wonderful presentations. If there are no other comments and questions, do I have to call?
Yes, no, you can adjourn.
Okay. Without any other questions, I hereby adjourn this meeting. Thank you.